Hey, what do you think we should do a video about today?
What's that? Well, you have that English malt from Murphy Rude. You've been wanting to make a beer with that. How about something like an English bitter?
I kind of like that idea.
Or how about a video on your new equipment? You know, you recently got that 15-gallon kettle with the ball valve. You picked up the bulkhead and the dip tube from brewhardware.com. And you also got that new brew bag from Wilser Bags. How about those?
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Or how about another split yeast experiment? You've been wanting to use verdant in a beer that's not a hazy IPA. How about that?
I'll have to give that one some thought.
Or how about a video of transferring Trub into the fermenter and what the impact might be? I know you often transfer a lot of Trub in the fermenter, and you've got a comment or two about that. It'd be good to test that out.
You know, I kind of like that idea too. Well, I think you've given me enough ideas. Let's get to it. Well, my name is Brent, and thanks for stopping by Cascade's Homebrew. As of this recording, I'm really close to hitting my 1,000 subscriber mark. I truly appreciate the support. And as a special gift for my first 1,000 subscribers, I'm giving everybody a lifetime subscription to the channel. What?
No, you can't say that.
And a free subscription to give to a friend?
No, YouTube doesn't work like that.
What? Oh, whatever. And also, I've got my Mash Out 2021 shirt on today. That's because Mash Out 2022, it's a camp out, is happening just a little over a week from now. It's a great event full of beer, food, camping, just fun with other homebrewers. In 2022, it's on August 18th. They usually schedule it for the third weekend in August. So if you make it this year, I hope to see you there. But if the date is passed, make sure you keep a calendar out for future events. Okay, back to the video. So sometimes, when I break out the camera on brew day, I'm not quite sure how the brew will go or what the best content will be to feature in a video. This was one of those brew days. My general plan was to brew a simple beer and try out some new equipment that I got. So I recently acquired a 15-gallon kettle with a nice quality ball valve on it. So I think it had been configured to use as a mash tun, so I needed to swap out some equipment, so I got a new bulkhead and a pickup tube from brewhardware.com. Also, the pot was too wide for my existing brew bag, so it was an opportunity to reach out to Whistler Bags to get a couple more. I got one custom made for my 15-gallon kettle, and I also got one custom made for my 5-gallon kettle. I'm really happy with those bags, so I'll probably cycle back again in the future, put out a video that's a little bit more focused on those equipments, maybe once I get a little bit more experience with them. So my plan was to brew a fairly simple, lower gravity beer, so I picked a best bitter. This also gave me a chance to use some Murphy Rude English malt that I've been wanting to try. And also, I had some EKG hops that had been passed along me from a brewer that was cleaning out supply of some older hop. So I had a lot of EKG that I wanted to use as well. So I decided my plan was to brew a 5-gallon batch of bitter and then split it into 2 fermenters. One was going to get verdant yeast, the other was going to get S-04. So I've used verdant several times in hazy beers. I've been curious about how it may work in a traditional English style beer. Well, as we'll see, one of the fermenters ended up with a lot more Trub in it. So I kind of scrapped that plan because clearly the amount of Trub, the amount of volume, and it was going to make 2 different beers anyways. So I went ahead with S-04 in both of them. I figured this might give me a good chance to evaluate. Does transferring a lot of Trub into... Oops, I dumped out my glass of water. But I figured it was a good chance to evaluate kind of my traditional method, how I've been transferring beer into a fermenter. Sometimes it ends up with quite a bit of Trub. So is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I've heard conflicting information about the importance of transferring clear beer into the fermenter, so I figured it'd be a good chance to give it a try. So before I get into evaluating the beer, let's take a quick look at the recipe, the brew day, and the fermentation. This is my Trub Experiment bitter. It's a best bitter, style 11B. Batch size for this one, it's 5.5 gallons, about 21 liters into the fermenter. Bitterness at 33 IBUs with a light color at 8.4 SRM. The recipe was calculated around a 73% efficiency. That would have gave me an OG of 1046, a final gravity of 1013, with a nice ABV of 4.4. I ended up coming in higher on the gravity, a little higher on the ABV as well. So the brew day started a little slower than normal, as I had to finalize some parts for my upgraded 15-gallon kettle. I also had to figure out how to measure my volumes for this kettle. For now, I'm just going to jump into the brew day. Maybe we'll come back to that in a future video. So I won't claim that I'm an expert on water profiles for English-style beers. Some of them can be fairly high in minerals as far as I've heard. In this case, I went for a profile fairly similar to what I would use for an American Pale Ale. So I wanted to boost the sulfate up to, say, 125, 150 range, and also that would boost up my calcium, say to like 75 range. So I ended with a sulfate to chloride ratio, about 3.1, so about 3 times more sulfate than chloride. I'll put the calculated water profile up on the screen. Again, the important thing here is just boosting up the calcium up a little bit, and then boosting up that sulfate level. So again, I use my tap water for my batch, so your adjustments may be a little different if you're using RO water or your own tap water, but I needed about 7.1 gallons, or 27 liters of tap water. To that, I had to add 3.1 milliliters of lactic acid to hit my target pH, around 5.4, but I don't think I actually measured it this batch. To boost the sulfate and the calcium, I added 5 grams of gypsum. I also included a tablet of Campton to remove chlorine and chloramine. So with my water measure out, I go ahead and I add in the lactic acid, and then add the gypsum and the Campton tablet. So the grain bill for this one was fairly simple, and like I said, it was a chance for me to use up some of that Murphy Rude Malt that I had been wanting to use. So the grain bill for this one was right around 95% of that pale ale malt from Murphy Rude, and then just over 5% of a Crystal 80 malt from Murphy Rude. That was 9 pounds or 4.1 grams of pale malt, and half a pound or 225 grams of crystal malt. So I gave this Wilser bag its inaugural run. I've used the one in my 5-gallon kettle a couple times. I've been very happy with it. So I add the grains to the heated strike water. I ended up with quite a few dough balls. I've often seen brewers with massive whisks, so I broke out my tiny one from the kitchen. It actually worked reasonably well, so maybe size doesn't matter after all. So for this match, I decided to mash at 154 degrees Fahrenheit or 68 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. That mash temperature should leave a little bit more residual sugar than a lower mash temperature, which helped keep the ABV in check. So I calculated the temperature that I need to hit my mash temperature. Note, this batch is going to get a 30-minute boil. So at the end of the 60-minute mash, I give the grains a good stir. I note that the temperatures drop from 154 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit over the 60 minutes. I then pull out the grain bag and let it drain while I start heating up the wort toward boiling. The hops of this one are all EKG or East Kent Golding. As I mentioned, I have a friend that was working at a brewery and they were cleaning out some supply of hops. So they had some unopened 11-pound bags of hops. So I split those up and got about 1.5 pounds. So now I have a bunch of 2007 crop year EKG. In my experience, as long as hops are sealed up and stored cool, they last pretty long. So I'm confident they're going to be good quality hops, but it looks like I'm going to have to brew more English beers in the near future. Like I said, the hops are all East Kent Goldings. So at 30 minutes, I had 1.5 ounces or 43 grams, giving me about 21 IBUs. With 10 minutes left in the boil, I had 1 ounce or 28 grams. That should give me about 7.7 IBUs. With 1 minute left in the boil, I had another 1.5 ounces or 43 grams. That should calculate about 4.3 IBUs. So the calculated IBUs for this one were 33.4. That seems on target for what I would like. And I'm hoping the 10-minute and the 1-minute one give me some good hop flavor and aroma. In addition, at that 10-minute mark, I add in 2.2 grams of yeast nutrient and a tablet of wort. So as the wort comes up to boiling, I add in the first charge of EKG hops. Then, with 10 minutes left, I added my second addition of EKG hops along with the yeast nutrient and the wort tablet. I also added my Jaded Hydra immersion chiller. I won this probably a year ago in a competition, and this might be the second or maybe third time I've used it. So I guess I'm just not brewing a lot of 5-gallon batches these days. I'm brewing a lot of 2.5 gallon on my stovetop. I think this one's a little overkill for that. So with 1 minute left in the boil, I go ahead and add my last addition of EKG hops. So then it's time to chill down to pitching temperatures. The Hydra does a good job of pulling out the majority of the heat, but with the warm summer groundwater here in Virginia, I swap over to using my submersible pump and ice water. I've used this pump several times in my kitchen for small batches. The pump, the Hydra, ice water, they do a pretty good job of getting me down to my target pitching temperature. So as I mentioned, my original plan was to split half with Verdant, half with S-04. But as we get into the transfer, we'll kind of see what happens. So using the ball valve, it started out well as I filled the first fermenter. When I tried to take a gravity reading between swapping fermenters, well, I noticed the problem. So I guess I didn't realize just how much liquid needed to be in the kettle to keep it above the spigot so that the siphon kept going. So a couple ideas ran through my head of how to transfer the beer into the fermenter, but I decided to go with my old tried and true method, dump and strain. So it did work to get the beer into the fermenter, and I was able to filter out a big pile of hops. So as I looked at the fermenters, and one of them clearly had a lot more Trub in it and a little less volume, well, I decided to bail on the split yeast trial. Instead, I decided to pitch S-04 into both batches. So I figured this might be a good opportunity to evaluate the impact of transferring Trub into a fermenter. So the yeast I used in this one was Fermentis S-04. I direct pitch it into each batch. So I measured it out and I added 5.8 grams to the first batch. We had a little more volume. And then I added 5.6 to the second batch, the one that had a lot of Trub and a little less volume. So here are the batches about 7 hours after pitching the yeast. The batch with more Trub is showing more signs of fermentation. So looking back, I wish I had evened out the amounts in each of the fermenters. There's a significant difference in volume, especially if you account for the room the Trub would take up. I do worry that this difference may have had an impact on the outcome of the experiment. Here we are looking at the batches the following morning. It's kind of hard to see in this video, but the batch with more Trub took off fermenting much faster. You can also see a lot more green from the hops up in the krausen. Here on day 2 of fermentation, the batch with more Trub is starting to slow down, while the batch with less Trub has picked up pace and is fermenting vigorously. So I decided to keg these beers on day 11. Looking at the batches, the one that had the more Trub but less volume, it took off faster and it clearly had been done fermenting. But the batch with less Trub, that had a little bit more volume, my gut was kind of telling me that it probably could have used a few more days in the fermenter, even though when I took a gravity reading, it was at the same gravity as the other batch. But I went ahead and made the decision that the state of the fermentation was just kind of part of the variable. So the fermentation schedule for this batch was to start them out at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius for the first 2 days, and then ramp them up to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius for another 2 days. And then after 4 days, I boosted the temperature to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, around 21 degrees Celsius until packaging. And then, as I mentioned, I kegged them on day 11. So if we look at the actual measured values for this one, so my efficiency came out higher. It might be just because of the small amount of grain in this one, so I hit 80%. The original gravity came in at 1052 with a final gravity of 1012. That was a 76% attenuation and an ABV of 5.3, which technically puts it out of the style guidelines for a best bidder. So no, I did get the same final gravity for both of the batches. So before I taste these beers, I want to admit it probably wasn't the best executed experiment. There were probably a couple more variables in play than I wanted. I think the different volume in the fermenters may have been one variable that would impact them. Also, I'm not quite sure if it was a good decision to go ahead and keg them on day 11, or if I should have just left both batches for a little while longer in the fermenter. So as I'm doing this evaluation, I've given these beers extra time in the keg to clear up. That's because the one that had a lot of Trub in it actually dropped clear fairly quickly, but then the one with a minimum amount of Trub in the fermenter, that one took a long time to clear up. We'll see how it looks today. Here's a picture taken 3 weeks in the keg. I can't quite explain why there's the consistent haze in the beer that had minimal Trub in it, while the beer that had a lot of Trub dropped very clear. That's really kind of the opposite of what people tell you. I hear a lot of people say clear wort into the fermenter means clear beer out of the keg. Is that true? It doesn't seem to be in this particular case. Alright, well, time to evaluate these beers. Hey, why don't you pour me a couple glasses?
Come on, man, you know that's not my job.
I guess I'll do it myself. Alright, so I poured myself some beers. So I noticed I've been a little inconsistent with what I call the batches. So this one, labeled first, is the one that was the first running from the kettle into the fermenter. It's the one that had minimal amount of Trub into it. So this one, number 2, this was the second transfer into the fermenter. The one that had to transfer through the strainer. The one that ended up with a lot of Trub in the fermenter. So if you can see, there's still a very consistent haze in this clear one. And the other one that had lots of Trub, has dropped very clear. As far as other visuals on them, I don't know. Except for the haze, I mean, you can't really see the bubbles through the haze. They both have a fairly nice creamy head that sticks to the glass okay. I don't notice a big difference in carbonation, head retention. So as I've been drinking these, I've definitely noticed a difference in the aroma. Let's go in. I'll start first with number 2. It's got a really nice, pleasant aroma. I did get the hops from the EKG, a little bit of that kind of earthy spiciness that I like, a little floral character. I get a kind of a malty, a little bit kind of a dark caramely kind of aroma, a little bit of kind of a English grainy, a little bit of kind of maybe some fruity characters that may be either from the hops or from the yeast. This is a nice, pleasant smelling beer. So if we go in the aroma for number 1, so again, it's very similar. I just get a little bit more, maybe kind of a fruity, a little bit of what I would say maybe kind of a sweet caramely kind of aroma. And this is where I'm wondering if this beer maybe has a slight level of diacetyl. I'm not sure I'm the best at identifying. Maybe we'll get into taste. We'll cycle back to that again. Tastes really good. It's got a sweetness that hits you up front. It's got some nice grain complexity that lingers. So the bitterness of this one, it's fairly light, but I think it's there and it's appropriate for what I like. I'm not positive exactly where the bitterness should be on these ones. So we go in for the taste on number 1. They're very similar, and I think they've gotten more similar over time. So in this one, again, I get that sweetness up front. I get the grain complexity. I get kind of that light bitterness. I get some sweetness in there. So I feel like this one, I just get a little bit more of kind of like a caramely kind of character. So again, they're a point right now, I don't know that I would be able to tell them apart in a blind triangle test. So I mean, clearly there's some visual differences between the beers. So as far as which one's a better beer, as far as like the taste, the aroma, I don't really have a strong preference. Like I said, I think this one just has a little bit more of kind of like a caramely sweetness that I get. Is that for diacetyl? I mean, my understanding, diacetyl is common and appropriate, at least at small amounts in this style of beer. But as far as the appearance, I definitely like the clear looks of this one over the hazy look of this one. So the haze in this one definitely confuses me a bit. The common advice you see online is clear beer into the fermenter. It's going to get you clear beer in the end. I also see people say it gives you a lot of better head retention. So in my case, if anything, the one that had a lot of Trub maybe has a little bit better carbonation and head retention. So as far as the overall beers in the recipe, I'm really happy with these. Kind of reminds me how much I like English style bitters. I used to brew these a lot when I started out, and then I kind of swapped over to doing more American pale ales. So these are both really nice beers. They got a lot of flavor to them, fairly low alcohol. They do have some mouthfeel and complexity to them, but they're easy to drink. So I'm planning soon to do an ordinary bitter. Should be a low ABV, a nice sessionable beer. And I'm going to take some of what I learned from these batches, put it into that one. It'll probably end up being a very similar recipe. So what are your thoughts on the different clarity in these beers? Do you think just the more Trub caused this one to drop clear, whereas the less Trub caused this one to be hazy? Do you think maybe it was just flaws in the fermentation? Maybe this hazy one just didn't ferment out clearly and left it hazy? Do you think it was something else that could have caused these? I'm kind of stumped a little bit myself. I don't think there's any kind of infection or off thing in this one. So anyways, I wanted to share this with you. I thought it was an interesting data point. It at least reassured me that transferring a little bit of Trub into the fermenter can still make a great beer, maybe even make a better beer. So if this kind of experiment and trial is interesting to you, well, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stick around, because I love doing this kind of stuff. I'll be doing more in the future. So click that notification bell and you'll get notified of my future videos. And if you think this information will help you build some great beers, click that like button. Cheers!